So we're going to do a quick session here that I think is quite important to Colorado about the difference between the different danger ratings on the North American public avalanche danger scale. So I think there's some key nuance that's very specific to a continental snow climate. It'll really help us inform how we make decisions about the moderate danger rating, which is where we spend most of our time kind of hanging in Colorado, right? So what we'll look at here is kind of a vague scenario where we start out in a low danger rating, right? So currently haven't seen snow in quite a long time, and we moved to a low. Keep in mind the nature of the Colorado snowpack with some poor persistent layers typically near the ground. And so those things, while not active, are still existing in the snowpack, and we might refer to it as, well, there is a reasonable strength at this point. The structure is still very poor, right? So as we see a storm enter the state, maybe we start to see the storm totals around 5 to 10 inches. We start to see the current danger elevate. But we're still not quite getting to the point where we're straining those persistences to the extent that we're going to see natural avalanching occur, right? So we aren't really seeing natural avalanches yet with only a small load. As the storm continues and we start seeing storm totals greater than 10 inches, we start seeing maybe enough strain being put on some of those persistences that we start seeing them fail and natural avalanches become possible, right? So keep understanding these two events, what's happening in the snowpack, right? And so as we start to see minor load, that's that the weak snow under there. It's not like it's not becoming strained. It's starting to shake. It's starting to tremble. The strain rate is a point which the snow can't adapt. And just because it isn't actually failing naturally doesn't mean it's not getting pushed that much closer, right? So we're actually starting to see an increased prevalence in avalanches. Upwards of 6 inches of snow is all it takes to start pushing that potential for human triggers up there, right? As we start seeing that greater than 10, maybe, and this is just a ballpark, of course, right? It really depends on the amount of snow and then the specific weak layers what will actually trigger a natural cycle. But after we start seeing more significant loading, the weak snow goes from trembling to now like actually failing as that strain rate becomes too much for it to bear, right? And we start seeing a natural avalanche cycle occur, right? This is pretty straightforward. Everyone kind of understands generally how this works. Now, the descent back away from this, though, after the storm cycle, this is really important to understand, right? So we've just had the storm clear. We've seen natural avalanching occurring. Maybe there's like one or two that happened the day after the storm clears, but there's no more loading. So we're not really seeing much in the way of naturals occurring at this point. And this is the challenge is now looking at the verbiage here, natural avalanches are no longer possible. So the tendency for forecasters pretty quickly after the storm clears is to bring the avalanche danger back down, right? Because naturals are not possible. Naturals are now unlikely, right? And so we're here in this moderate category where we're not actually seeing any kind of like natural cycle occurring. The challenge is, though, that snow is under there still trembling, right? Like we just one day out of the natural cycle, it's just barely on the verge of a natural cycle. So we have a situation where natural avalanches are unlikely, so we tend to want to call it moderate, but we don't have a natural avalanches being possible. We have natural avalanches being extremely likely with even remote triggers occurring, but no naturals, right? And so there's this disconnect in the verbiage here, and this is a tricky one to suss out. And so there's a real difference between this like upper side of moderate danger, where we really have like likely human triggers but no naturals, and then as we start to get a few more days out of the storm, we start seeing human triggers becoming much less likely. We aren't seeing remote triggers. We are getting reports of human triggers, but they're in a much more kind of specific areas, not in a widespread fashion, right? And as we start to even get farther out, we start to see like maybe really few or almost no reports of human triggered avalanches, right? But we still have this insanely poor structure where like if you were to get one to go, it would be large and potentially fatal. And so the forecasters are usually disinclined to put it at low because there are these really big dangerous avalanches out there. They're just really, really hard to find at this point. And so this is the key now is this evolution of considerable back down to moderate, right? And where are we in moderate? Are we at the high end of moderate where we're seeing really reactive human triggered avalanches? Or are we at the low end of moderate where we're really not seeing much in the way of avalanching at all? And that's a really key distinction to ask yourself going to the backcountry. We really just don't consider all moderates to be created equal. And I think it's really important if you're going into steeper, more committing terrain, they can produce large avalanches, like asking yourself, are we at the moderate minus or the moderate plus, right? There's a real big difference in the two.